Hello everyone and welcome back to another Getting Stuff Painted, my bi-weekly update, give or take, on the miniatures I've been painting for the channel. And we don't have that many models to talk about this week, but I hope you'll excuse that based on the size of most of them. And I think there was actually quite a lot to talk about with what's going to cover the most of this video, which is Monster Hunter World, the board game, some of the monsters and hunters from that. I've got a few things to talk about, especially regarding what I primarily use, which is contrast paint, if you aren't familiar with the series at all. This is all contrast work on top of Grey Seer, which is one of Citadel's base paints it recommends for contrast paint. And usually contrast paint doesn't do that well with large miniatures, but in this instance I think it did do well. So I just want to talk through the experience of painting these and how it differs to other larger models, which can sometimes not work great with contrast paint. Besides that, we also have a little bit of Blood Bowl, and we have a tiny bit, and this is actually on the other end of the spectrum, a tiny bit from Fallout Wasteland Warfare, and I did not have a good time with those models. But as always, we'll go from left to right with intermittent pauses for my very impatient dog. And yeah, we'll just chat this out and hopefully it'll be interesting. So before we talk about the big monsters from Monster Hunter the board game, I'll do this in the order I painted, which is the hunters first and then the monsters from left to right as you see them: Barrett, Puki, and most recently, as of, I just finished it last night, Kuliaku. But we have the two hunters that I've been using in the series and will continue to use. Gunlance is my main weapon in the Monster Hunter video games, so obviously I was going to use this one in the board game, and I felt like complementing a slow weapon with some moderate defense abilities, having a ranged weapon would be a good idea. Bow is my favorite ranged weapon available of the three you can use, so I decided to paint that one up as well. So this is a fairly typical contrast paint job on this model. I don't feel the hunters are as detailed as the monsters, and it kind of shows in the paint job as well, although the yellow I ended up using to try and get that Great Jaguar's colour with Agrat Surfshade on top didn't work out as well as I hoped it would. It was just a Yandin yellow, applied a little bit thinly because I didn't really want a lot of the orange tint that it can have. On top of it, before adding any washes, I did some streaks with Black Templar and also Militarum Green, because the Great Jaguarus is kind of almost camouflaged. It's like a gecko kind of thing. So yes, he's predominantly yellow, but he has these streaks and patterns that are a bit hard to replicate, and the armour has them as well, because the armour is made from bits of him. So there's the shield as well, as again, as best as I was able, lead belcher for the silver parts, wash over everything Glumin Flesh for what little of the hunter's face you can see, and I believe that is Moot Green for his Scout Fly pouch thing, and hopefully that was mostly in focus. A little bit of brown for the straps and the base of the gun lance as well, or whatever, the barrel I guess you would call it. That is Wildwood specifically, I think. But yeah, I didn't feel like I did a great job with this hunter, or indeed the other one, partially because of the lack of detail for the size they are. Like, they're basically, well, they're maybe a little bit smaller than, say, a standard Blood Bowl player model. The Blood Bowl player model has so much more detail than the hunter did, so contrast didn't have as much to work with, which is kind of the opposite story with the monsters, but we'll get to that. So that is Gunlance Hunter wearing Great Jaguar's armour. We'll be talking more about the Great Jaguar's colour scheme when I paint the Great Jaguars itself. It's on the to-do list. It will probably be quite soon. I think it's one of the harder ones to paint because of the weird camouflage it has, so we'll see what I end up doing with it. This bow hunter is one of the extra spare poses you can get for the bow user, and he's wearing the Tobi Kadachi armour. I wasn't sure what kind of blue I wanted to go with for Tobi Kadachi, because he's a mix of like silver, light blue, dark blue, and then his lightning is different colours as well. So I settled on Talisar blue as a test run before I paint Tobi himself. It's okay, but it doesn't really evoke quite the same colour blue as his armour does in the game. I'm not sure there's a contrast paint that will, to be honest. I'm considering still going with Talisar blue for Tobi, but then while it's wet, mixing in the new, what was it called? When they brought out the new shades of blue contrast paint, they also brought out a new blue wash. Not Draken Shade, that's too dark, it's slightly brighter than that. Don't remember what it's called, but I'm thinking that on top in certain areas, and then a dry brushing of the base coat, Grey Seer, in others, will create the kind of coloration Tobi has in the video game, I think. Whether or not I'll be able to pull it off, that is entirely a different subject entirely. I said entirely twice there. But I'll attempt it at the very least, and that's how I plan to attempt it. And Tobi is sitting spray painted, base coated, just waiting for me to work up the courage to start trying to apply some paint to them. And that's the story with most of these big monsters. I was working up the courage to start trying to apply paint to such a big model that you don't really want to mess up, and then backing down being like, no, maybe I'll paint something else first, and then eventually just reaching that point where I was like, I'll just throw paint on and see what happens. Although on that note, I guess we can talk about the monsters now after I throw a ball. So the first of the big monsters was Barrett, whom we liked to bully back in the day of playing, especially Monster Hunter World. There's a clip on the gaming channel of us playing the demo for Monster Hunter World where Barrett was one of the hunts you could do in it, and we all took bow guns, which have kind of like a machine gun mode in World, and we all just did it on him and bullied him into submission in record time, and it was very, very funny. But as a result, Barrett always sticks in my mind, and looking at this, you would think I did lots, or potentially think I did lots of like complicated stuff to try and get the depth of like the mud look on him and the shadows and everything like that. No, this is 2 contrast paints. 4 if you count a dollop of red for each of his eyes, and then a skeletal horde for what teeth are showing. If you don't include those, this is literally 2 contrast paints just slapped on the base. And then a dry brushing of Mornfang Brown on the tips of these, which I honestly don't think you can even really tell I did that. But the 2 contrast paints here are Firebrand Flesh for the lighter brown tones, and then I believe, it was either Wildwood or it was the new sewer colour. I think it was Wildwood. Because it almost has a wood-like quality, his muddy parts. And that was it. That was literally all I did for this. He's so large it did take a little while, but that was all that was done. And usually with contrast paints, and this is what I was alluding to before, the larger a model is, the less effective contrast paint tends to be, because larger models tend to have larger, flatter areas, and that gives the contrast paint nothing to work with. It doesn't have crevices to seep into, it doesn't have anything to work with. Like the bases for these is a perfect example of a large flat shape. Like to do these bases, I do contrast paint black over them, either one, doesn't matter. It looks horrible, looks very streaky, and then I do a normal black paint over the top to create the matte finish. With large flat models, contrast paint struggles. Like the classic example when contrast paints first came out was a Space Marine Rhino. It's all flat corners. Contrast paint, it struggles because it's got those large flat corners. The reason I feel like it hasn't struggled with these monsters is because Steamforged didn't skimp on the quality of the detail of them. So it's not really me doing anything special, it's just the model is so detailed that contrast paint has so much to work with. It has all these, it's not even just a case of, in between these plates of armor there's a gap for it to seep into to create shadow. It's not as simple as that. If I get a bit closer here, you can see on each individual one there's indents, like there's pattern, there's shape. Same down here, it's not just like a tyrannid type leg, there's more definition. And even in the larger parts on his head, which look kind of flat, they're almost like tree bark, because they've got little recesses in them in between. Like this is 1, 2, 3, 4 sections, but each of those 4 sections they've got lines and character, and that is perfect for contrast paint because that's what it needs to create definition. That's how it creates shadow, and then on the edges it thins, and that creates the implication of a highlight, and that's how it works. So working with this model, thanks to its detail, made it turn out really good. And I'm saying it turned out really good not because I'm a good painter, just because it worked so well with the level of detail in the miniature. And I sincerely hope that when Steamforged reveal their Iceborne Kickstarter, which is an expansion to Monster Hunter World, the video game, that the quality of miniatures does not suffer because of rising costs. Because if the quality of miniature suffers, that's bad for a bunch of reasons, but having to paint them as well will become more difficult if the quality is not to this standard as it was when they launched this campaign back in, 2020, 2021. But yeah, I was massively impressed by the quality just when I did the unboxing for Monster Hunter World, and it stayed true after getting to paint old Barrett here, and I'm very happy with how it turned out. Not so much the second one we're going to talk about, but one ball later. So we have Puki. He pukes poison from both ends, and that's not an exaggeration. It comes out of there, he's horrible. And what I was alluding to there is something like I can't really offer advice on how to paint. Like, I did nothing special there. Literally anyone can do what I did there. Same with anything I paint, because it's just contrast paint. But I can at least give advice on how to use contrast paint, and I made a mistake here with Puki that I wouldn't have made on a smaller model because it was down to his size. Let's quickly talk about the colours from what I can remember. Learning from Immortal Hulk that I talked about either last time or the time before, I used that colour, which is Mantis Warrior Green, I think, for the majority of this. While it was wet, I put on a little bit of Warp Lightning to darken some of the areas that just in the video game he's darkened. Did the same here, and then did a Talisar blue on top again while it was damp, because he does almost have a bluish tint in the video game, that is, to the, whatever you call these, the plumes, I guess. Just plain yellow, Imperial Fish yellow for his eyes, a little bit of Fire Slayer flesh for his gullet and his chicken legs, Philippus pink for his tongue, but then the tip was Luxian purple, same with the tip of his tail here, because that's where he spews poison from, because that's his whole thing. And a mixture of all three of those colours plus Sigvald Burgundy for his tail, which is a variety of colours, because it's kind of got almost like chameleon, sorry, I almost said Chameleos, which is a monster from Monster Hunter. But he's almost got a chameleon thing going on. But the thing I was wanting to specifically mention, I'll just do a quick 360 here, is regarding the wings. So the tips of Puki's wings, also you can see I accidentally let some of the contrast green pull right along this wing too much. Technically I could fix it by, I'd have to like redo this part of the wing. I opted not to because it's hidden anyway. But that was a mistake. I just you've got to be careful with contrast paint pulling too much, and I missed that part. Again, probably because it's a large model, so it's hard to keep track of that as you're going. But the thing I wanted to mention about the tips of the wings, Puki's wings are kind of flesh toned and then they turn green as they go closer to his body, which is fine. And I wanted to do a little bit of a blending with, I believe it was Skeletal Horde and then the Mantis Warrior Green. Unfortunately, because I was working with such a large area, usually you can blend contrast paint super easy. It works really well. But when you're doing a large area and you're trying to do one colour and then you bring out the other one and mix it, by the time you get to that with contrast paints, they dry really quickly, which is a good thing and a bad thing. So it didn't blend as well as I would have liked because it was such a large area. Like, I did one wing, then I did the other, but I was doing, both sides of the wing. So by the time I was ready to slap on the colour I wanted to mix, it was like, oh, it's already dried. A few of my friends are using the Armory Painter contrast paints. I've forgotten what they call them, but they've got their own kind of contrast paints. Apparently those take longer to dry, and I think that would probably be better for something of this size. Although I think they're trying to redo the formula or something to make it dry faster because it takes a really long time, apparently. I've never used them. But that was the problem I suffered from here. It did create a kind of nice look on this wing, not so much on this wing. I don't like how this looks. But on this wing, it's almost like it's like burnt or damaged, like something's hurt him. Because I'm not quite sure how it happened either. But there's a very distinct line of contrast paint that you can trace like that. And I didn't do that on purpose. And I don't think there's any scars on the model that made that happen. It just kind of happened by itself as it was mixing while it was drying. And honestly, I really like that effect. I wish it had happened over here. You can kind of see it happening like in this corner here, but it didn't happen with the same line of definition, like the clear line of definition. Even from far away, like you can very clearly see there's like almost like something tried to bite off its wing. And I like that effect, and I wish I knew how it happened, because I would happily make it happen over here. But it looks okay. The thing that makes the Puki model look great is, again, its quality and the level of detail, because it let contrast paint work with so much, and it's such a colourful monster that it definitely stands out, that's for sure. And it just looks nice because of the quality that they decided to put in. Like, look, I don't know how easy this is going to be to see, but look at the detail on his gullet. Like, look how bumpy it is and what contrast had to work with. Can you imagine if that was just one flat shape of plastic? There would be nothing to work with. Slap on the contrast and it wouldn't look that great. But because of all those little bumps for it to sink into and dry, or even like I was going to say creases, but I guess wrinkles might be a better word. The wrinkles on his feet even look more defined as well. So again, reiterating, I really hope the level of quality of miniatures do not drop in their Iceborne. They've showed off like prototypes, and renders and things like that. I just hope that the finished quality is exactly the same, because it's among the best quality miniatures I've ever seen, these giant monsters. So finished as of yesterday, we have Kuliaku, who aggressively wants to show you his pet rock. A bit smaller compared to the other monsters available for Monster Hunter World, the board game. This was just a Kickstarter exclusive monster. He's a goofy one. He's a super early one in the video game. He's not particularly threatening, although there was a Final Fantasy tie-in version which was huge and was carrying like a materia crystal or an I forget what kind of crystal he was carrying. A crystal of some kind, and that one was scary. But in general, he's kind of goofy. He carries pots and sometimes eggs, and he kind of pecks into the eggs and eats. He steals Wyvern eggs and eats them. But sometimes he picks up a rock and pecks at that, or shows it to you by throwing it into your face or jumping at you with it. Very fun monster, just an adorable goof. And again, turned out well thanks to the definition on his skin, because he's kind of got lizard-like skin, I guess. I'm not really sure of what you would call it. He's kind of like a velociraptor almost, I guess. So if he was just flat-skinned, it would look so plain and streaky, and I don't know, something like Lockjaw from Crisis Protocol. He had like fat folds, or not to be impolite to the poor dog, but he didn't have fur definition, so contrast it didn't really work with it. But with this, I don't know how close I can quite get for it to stay in focus, but hopefully you can see all the little bumps and lizard, I don't know, mesh, I don't know what to call it really, but that is all there, and that makes it work. Colors wise, this one, this was, a lot of these I just kind of started applying colors I thought looked right and just worked with it. This is Imperial Fish yellow, Griffhound orange, Bal red. Same one as plumes on his head, basically the same on his face, but applied at separate times so they didn't mix together. Dollop of the bright green contrast paint for his eyes with a black dot. I dared to try and do the actual pupil, and it kind of worked, honestly. His skin is just Skeletal Horde, literally just Skeletal Horde, but on top of that, or sorry, before applying that, he does have some patterns, and I did my best to replicate them, both from other people who've painted this, trying to copy them, and also official video game screenshots to try and match it up. I got close. I used the standard Citadel light orange. I don't use a dark orange, it wouldn't work with a dark orange. Just a colour, like he's got that going under his belly, his feet, because he's got chicken feet as well. He's got kind of like triangles going up and down his tail, but then in the opposite order on his back. I did those first, let it dry fully, and then did the Skeletal Horde all over the top. Just used a normal black for his beak, and I used Basilicanum Grey for the boulder, but then that didn't look really good, so I did what I do for Crisis Protocol bases, and then went over that with Stormvarmin Fur, which is just a standard grey paint by Citadel. Oh, I see a crumb on his base. That's going to annoy me if I don't remove it immediately. There we go. So he was faster than the others. He's smaller, no less detail though. Like even like there's spare little bits on the eye, and you can kind of see the eyelash. It almost looks like a Muppet. But yeah, very nice model, and a personal favorite from World. I will say the only part I didn't like with his fingers are kind of almost within the stone. That's just because of the modeling process, I guess. It meant it was hard to define his fingers, and I don't think that part looks particularly great, to be honest. But the rest of it I really like, and again, from a distance, he looks adorable. You want to be his friend, even though he will 100% try and kill you. So that's what I've managed to get done for Monster Hunter World, the board game. I am just going through them at the moment. Tangential thing, but there seems to be a massive shortage again. This has happened before. There's been a massive shortage of pots of Grey Seer, which is my base coat of choice for everything I paint. There are some exceptions where I'll use the other one they do, but I almost 100% of the time use Grey Seer, and pots of that in all of Europe, not just the UK, are really hard to come by right now. Games Workshop's official website, third-party retailers, nobody has them. They have the spray cans, and I have a spray can, so that's kind of why I worked up the courage to start taking on these big monsters, because I used the spray paint on them, not the pot paint, so I can make the pot paints last longer if I'm getting through my spray paint instead, although the spray paint is really expensive. But hey, at least it's in stock. So you'll probably see more large monsters. I have a couple base coated. I think I alluded to having Toby base coated earlier. I've got Great Jagras, base coated with the spray paint, so he'll probably be on the table next time. And I have the Modoc that was very kindly donated to the channel, base coated, although I haven't painted that yet, but we'll probably see that too. I usually cover what I'm painting for next time at the end of the video, but I felt like that was tangentially connected because it explains why I was willing to take on the big models, because big models when you can't paint is intimidating. It's very intimidating. That's why it took me so long to paint a Storm Surge back in the day when I played 40k. Anyway, ball throw and then we'll move on. So moving slower and closer, and talk about two of the Bogenhafen Barons. We've already seen Griff Overwald and the Ogre from the 2020 Blood Bowl starter set. I think I mentioned last time that I assembled half the team for the Bogenhafen Barons. I didn't want to assemble them all because then that would make them feel like such a daunting task, because I think there's 14 of them, or maybe it's 12. Either way, it's a lot. So I did half them because then it feels like you're not going to be as stuck on a project. So I painted up, I think this is just a general lineman, did him first, and I think this is a bodyguard, which is kind of like the Bogenhafen Barons or Imperial Nobility. They're kind of special unit that has Fend and something else, Wrestle, I think. So I did already talk about the colours I'm using when I talked about Griff Overwald. The exact same colours, you hear my dog crying, she's lying right below the camera. She's finding new ways to rebel. Is this in focus? I sincerely hope it is, yes. Mixture of Sigwald Burgundy, just the base coat with a wash over the top for the white parts. The Nazdrag yellow to give the gold impression, and Nuln Oil over everything after done. Some silver used in some places. I applied the number after doing the full paint jobs because I feel like it's more important for them to stand out. Did the opposite when I was painting the Orc team, whose name I'm blanking on, something Jaw. Either way, and it just makes the numbers hard to see, so I decided, you know what, just do the numbers afterwards. It'll look clean, but whatever, because it's more important that you know who is who, player number wise. So that's what I did for that one. And again, exact same colors, except this guy is way more flamboyant. He's got feathers, and he's got something that would hit him in the face if he turned too far to the right, whatever that is. You know how Imperial Nobility are, I guess. Same colours though, just the only difference here is a bit of yellow, bit of red, and a bit of that skeletal horde and snakebite leather for I think they're griffin feathers they're supposed to be. The yellow I used isn't quite matching up to the official paint job. It's the closest as I could get without having a paler one to use. He's got a bit more armour on as well, so I'm pretty sure he's a bouncer. Him and there's a tubby model. I think they're the bouncers. And the numbers I'm giving them are the ones the official paint jobs have, so I sincerely hope there isn't any duplicates because that'll just be confusing. But either way, these ones, like the assembly for the Bogenhafen Barons from the 2020 starter set is annoying. They're all more complicated than they need to be or should be, but none as bad so far as Griff. Him and Varag Gulchur from the starter sets, they're just awful. The assembly instructions are not thorough, and the assembly is just really irritating. So speaking of really irritating, let's finish by talking about two more sets of Enclave power armor. And I think I talked about these, it wasn't the last time, I think it was the time before that, where I just had two bog standard sets of Enclave power armor. I tried something a bit different with them and I was actually really happy with how they turned out. Well, when I picked up that box of them, I also managed to pick up the box of the Tesla armor, Enclave power armor. This one's just still using their basic Enclave plasma weapon. This one I think is an incinerator, I don't quite remember, but I thought, oh, why not paint them up in basically the same way. The only difference is they have like Tesla packs around them, so they hurt anyone nearby them, friend or foe. And they did the thing, registered trademark, worse than I think any Fallout Wasteland Warfare miniature I've ever painted. Like sometimes there's really bad parts of some of the miniatures, just down to, you know, the thing, whatever resin they're using, making paint run, whether it's contrast or otherwise, for the record. Lead Belcher, the base coat, they ran as well. Like, it looks, when I washed them, again, I know people always try and think, well, did you wash them? Did you clean them thoroughly? Did you base coat them thoroughly? The answer is yes and no. Yes, I washed them. Yes, I try and be very thorough with Modiphius's resin, because I know it can do this, and it's very irritating when it does. But even when I did that, I applied the base coat. You know, you can kind of hold them, because Grey Seer isn't a pure white paint, it's kind of like an egg white, or I don't know, it's got a little bit of shade to it. It's a little grey, a little almost brown, like just a hint of it. The other base coat is more brown, but either way. I held it up to the light after applying the base coat, and you could just see splotches everywhere where the paint just evaporated. It just wasn't there. So what that led to was attempts, well, for this one, my attempt was just to lay on the black paint very thick and then do a very thick dry brushing of silver like I did for the other ones, and it just wasn't working. So I had to use normal black paint, and as a result this looks blotchy, or not blotchy, it just looks undefined because it's got too much paint layered on it, and I hate it. So I don't like this at all, and it demoralized me thoroughly having to put up with just the paint just not sticking to the model. It is so frustrating. That's one of the good things about them eventually switching to a full plastic range. Yes, the bases are going to suck because they're just plain bases, but at least the models will be paintable, because this just frustrated me to no end. Now, after suffering through getting this one done, I knew what to expect with this guy. I washed him again, and it didn't make much of a difference. I base coated him twice, but I tried to be a little bit more strategic with where I was applying the second coating to just try and get what I missed. And when I came to doing the dry brushing, I was a little bit more thorough in certain areas to try and hide where the paint hadn't stuck, and it turned out a little bit better. I used Talisar blue incidentally for the kind of like the Tesla packs, and Nazrag yellow for the copper wiring or whatever it's meant to be that runs between them. I don't like the effect really, but I was done with the models when they frustrated me. I can still see spots on the base where the paint hasn't ever dried, despite using a wash, despite then going over contrast plus wash with a base coat of Storm Vermin. Doesn't work. If you turn it this way, you can probably, well, maybe not. Maybe I was a bit more thorough with this one. I'm trying to see like under the arms to see if I can see if any other bits that I just missed because it just wasn't. Oh yeah, under the gun there's a, I'm not sure how visible that'll be, but under the gun at the back there, and then under the barrel, paint's just pulled away again, and I never noticed. Or I probably did notice. I probably put a ball, oh right there too, a dollop of silver in there, thinking, well, if I put enough in there, it can't all evaporate or do the thing, trademark. But it did, and it's just the resin. It's just pure resin now. And what range is this? 2018. Yeah, the 2017-2018 period was when this was at its worst. It still happens. Like the newer miniatures I've been painting have still done it. The Zealot Congregation, or whatever it's called, the Children of the Atom that we showed off a couple of weeks back, they did it to a very bad degree. Nothing compared to these two. I hate them. I hate my paint job on them. I hate how much frustration it was to get them painted. At least they're done. I wish they turned out as well as the bog standard Enclave Power Armor, because honestly I really like that look. It looked just different enough from standard Power Armor that you could tell these guys aren't nice. But these, they look amateurish, and I hate them. You know, with the benefit of hindsight, I probably should have started with the Fallout Wasteland Warfare, given that it was a bit of a sour note and a frustrating experience, because the rest of it was fun, and I will be doing more of. So, as I mentioned earlier, next time we'll be seeing some more monsters from Monster Hunter, the board game. I don't have any plans to paint up any more hunters because I'm happy with the weapons I'm using. I might paint up the Palicos just to have a visual representation of them, or Poogie just because it's fun, because Poogie's kind of like the mascot of the video games. Still got more Bogenhafen and Barons. I've also got some purchases I made for the Batman miniature game, not directly from Night Models. It's newer releases that I didn't get from them when they released. I picked them up a bit cheaper from third-party retailers. I'm starting to get through them. I'm not sure, you won't see all of them next time, but you'll probably see one or two, because I've got a couple just sitting ready. Not going to spoil what they are though, just little additions to existing crews. Beyond that, just out of line of sight, I do actually have a God tier box here, just sitting, waiting, but for now, because of I know the limitation regarding trying to track down pots of Grey Seer, I probably will be focusing mostly on the big monsters from Monster, or anything of roughly equal size where I can justify using my spray paints to get them done instead. But anyway, this has probably rambled on a lot longer than I thought it would, given that I only had like 10-11 miniatures to talk about. But if you want to show me what you've been painting, feel free to do so on Twitter. Well, Twitter is still a thing. I would link it in the video description below. And I hope this inspired you to get painting. Even if you're not good at it, contrast paint can help make up for that. Little tricks and things with washes can do the same thing, and just basic dry brushing. It makes it look presentable. Doesn't need to look amazing. You're not trying to win Golden Demon here. and it's fun and it's relaxing. So I hope this inspired you to get something done. And with that, I will see you in about 2 weeks for the next one. Until then, ta-ta for now.